In central Virginia's rolling hills, during the spring of 1834, a discovery was made that would forever alter our understanding of human evil's depths. Beneath an ordinary-looking farmhouse, in a basement, 47 children were found chained. Their ages ranged from 6 to 16. The children did not resemble each other, spoke various languages, and when asked, could only whisper one name through their tears: Mother Sullivan. Describing scenes so disturbing that 3 officers resigned within a week, the local sheriff's report was buried for over a century in the Henrico County archives. This case is truly haunting not just for the horror discovered, but for the chilling realization that Constant Sullivan's twisted enterprise had operated undetected for more than 2 decades. They called her Mother, but the truth behind that title would prove far more sinister than anyone imagined. Before we continue with the Sullivan family's unspeakable secrets, I must ask you something important. This channel is only for the bravest souls, for those who dare confront the darkest chapters of American history. If you've made it this far, you're not like most people. You understand some truths are too horrifying to ignore, no matter how disturbing. So, hit subscribe and join our community of true mystery seekers. Tell me in the comments, what state are you listening from? Are you brave enough to hear stories like this from your own backyard? The question that haunted investigators then, and still perplexes historians now, is how such a massive operation remained hidden so long in a close-knit rural community. In 1834, Virginia was a land caught between 2 worlds. The old plantation system still dominated, while whispers of industrial change drifted from the north. Here, the small farming community of Millbrook, a collection of maybe 50 families across Henrico County's gentle slopes, represented the era's typical American rural settlement. Most residents farmed tobacco or corn, traded at Henderson's general store, and gathered at the one-room schoolhouse that doubled as a meeting hall. On the community's outskirts sat the Sullivan property, a modest 2-story wooden farmhouse surrounded by nearly 200 acres of prime farmland. To any traveler on the dusty road to Richmond, the Sullivan farm seemed utterly unremarkable. 253, built in the Federal style popular during the 1810s, the house featured white painted clapboard siding and a wraparound porch, typical of Virginia. A red barn stood 60 yards behind, with a chicken coop and smokehouse completing the farmstead layout. What made the property unique wasn't visible from the road. Having purchased the land in 1809 with inherited tobacco money, Ezra Sullivan spent considerable effort expanding the house's basement. While most Virginia homes then had simple root cellars, the Sullivan basement extended far beyond the house's footprint above. 336, throughout the 1810s and 1820s, local craftsmen recalled being hired for various excavation projects, though none saw the completed work. Ezra paid well in cash, asking workers to focus only on their assigned sections. Constant Sullivan, Ezra's wife, arrived in Millbrook in 1811 as a 22-year-old bride. Neighbors remembered her as a handsome woman with dark hair and an unusually soft voice. She dressed simply but neatly, attended Methodist services when health allowed, and maintained a reputation for charity. When asked to contribute to community causes, Constance would explain she and Ezra were already caring for several orphan children from her Pennsylvania family. The arrangement, she said, was temporary, just until permanent homes could be found. This satisfied community curiosity about occasional glimpses of children on the property. Mrs. Henderson at the store sometimes saw a young face peering from the Sullivan wagon during supply trips. The children never spoke, but Constance would explain they were shy, traumatized by loss, and needed time to adjust. Familiar with the tragedy of orphans in a high-mortality era, the community accepted this without question. Thomas Henderson, who ran the general store, later recalled Constant Sullivan as one of his most reliable customers. 514 every 2 weeks, she arrived with a detailed list and enough cash to buy substantial staples: flour, cornmeal, salt, pork, and molasses. The quantities seemed large for a childless couple, but Constance would remind him about the orphans. She also bought unusual amounts of basic medicines, explaining children from poor circumstances often arrived with ailments. The Sullivan farm operated on a puzzling schedule. While most families worked from sunup to sundown, activity here often continued well into evening. Lights shone in windows at odd hours, and the sound of hammering sometimes echoed across fields at night. When asked, Ezra said he was making improvements for the growing number of children in their care. Dr. Marcus Whitfield, the traveling physician for Millbrook, remembered being called to the farm several times in the 1820s and early 1830s. Each time, he was told an orphan child had fallen ill. However, Dr. Whitfield was never allowed to examine the children directly. Instead, Constance would describe symptoms and request specific medications. If the doctor insisted on seeing his patients, Constance explained the children were too frightened of strangers, too traumatized to allow examination. The deception was so complete that even the local pastor, Reverend Samuel Matthews, believed in the Sullivans' charitable work. During occasional visits, he praised their Christian compassion. He offered to help find permanent homes. But Constance would say she was already corresponding with Pennsylvania relatives who would eventually take the children. The process, she assured him, simply required patience and careful. When her family reported her missing to the Richmond sheriff, they described her last known location. A search party was organized, but the vast Virginia wilderness made finding one person nearly impossible. The search was called off after a week. Mary Catherine was presumed dead from exposure or wild animals. 10:08, the final incident leading to discovery happened on April 2, 1834. A local farmer, William Hutchinson, was hunting rabbits in woods bordering the Sullivan property when he heard something that stopped him cold. From near the farmhouse came the sound of children screaming. Not ordinary cries, but raw, desperate shrieks of terror. 10:30, Hutchinson crept closer, hiding behind oak trees about 50 yards from the house. For nearly an hour, he watched and listened. The screaming continued intermittently, always seeming to come from beneath the house. At one point, he saw Ezra Sullivan emerge from what looked like a cellar door. Sullivan looked around nervously, then disappeared back underground. When Hutchinson reported this to neighbors, opinions divided. Some suggested the orphans might be more troubled, perhaps requiring distressing discipline or treatment. Others began remembering odd details. The unusual food purchases, strange night sounds, that no orphans were ever seen in town. 11:13, Sheriff Benjamin Crawford, a 15-year veteran of Henrico County law enforcement, initially dismissed concerns as gossip. However, when Hutchinson insisted on a formal complaint, Crawford agreed to investigate. The law required follow-up on potential child abuse reports. 11:35, on the morning of April 8, 1834, Sheriff Crawford rode to the Sullivan farm with Deputy Marcus Webb. They arrived just after sunrise, expecting a routine inspection to settle community rumors. Constant Sullivan met them at the door, calm and welcoming. She invited them inside for coffee and expressed concern about community gossip. The conversation began normally. Constance explained again about the orphans, showed letters from Pennsylvania relatives, and offered to arrange a meeting once the children recovered from illness. Everything seemed reasonable until Deputy Webb asked to use the privy. 12:22. Walking around the house, Webb noticed something that made his blood run cold. The cellar door William Hutchinson had seen was secured with 3 padlocks. Heavy chains wrapped the handles, and the wood around the locks showed signs of desperate clawing, as if someone had tried to scratch out from inside. Returning quietly to inform Sheriff Crawford, both men knew this was more serious than gossip. Crawford politely asked Constance to show them the cellar, explaining a thorough inspection would settle rumors. The change in Constant Sullivan's demeanor was immediate and chilling. Her face went pale, her hands trembled, and she stammered about the cellar being dangerous, that children weren't allowed down there, that there was only old farm equipment. That was when they heard it. From beneath their feet came children crying, followed by a weak voice calling for help. 13:26, muffled but unmistakable. The sound came from directly below the kitchen where they stood. The immediate aftermath of that first discovery would haunt Sheriff Crawford for life. Forcing open the cellar door, the stench that rose was overwhelming. A mixture of human waste, unwashed bodies, and what Crawford later called the smell of despair itself. 13:50. The basement Ezra Sullivan had spent over 2 decades constructing was a masterpiece of calculated cruelty. The main chamber stretched far beyond the house's footprint, extending underground like a warren. Stone walls, carefully mortared to muffle sound, created interconnected rooms. The largest chamber, beneath the kitchen, housed most children. They were chained to iron rings embedded in stone walls, each secured by ankle shackles. The chains allowed movement within a small area but prevented escape. The children, aged approximately 6 to 16, were emaciated, clothed in rags, bearing marks of prolonged neglect and abuse. 1435, many showed illness signs, fever, respiratory problems, skin conditions from damp, unventilated living. What struck both officers most was the silence. After initial cries for help, the children said nothing. They simply stared with eyes holding no hope, no expectation of rescue. 1503, Deputy Webb, a father of 4, left twice to vomit. Sheriff Crawford, despite years of experience, couldn't process the scope. The methodical imprisonment, evidence of long-term planning, the sheer number of victims. It was beyond anything in his imagination. In smaller chambers, they found evidence of the Sullivan control system. One room held stocks and restraining devices for punishment. Another had a primitive medical area where children were treated not from compassion, but to keep them alive and functional. A third room contained detailed records crucial to the investigation. Names, ages, arrival dates, notes on each child's condition and behavior. The records revealed the operation's scope. Children had arrived regularly since 1812, shortly after Constant came to Millbrook. Sources varied. Orphans bought from poorhouses, runaways lured with promises, others simply kidnapped. The records showed over 90 children had passed through the Sullivan basement over the years. The obvious question, what happened to the others, was answered horrifyingly. In a separate chamber, reached through a narrow crawl passage, Crawford and Webb found remains of at least 36 children. 1643, some died from illness or malnutrition. Others showed violent signs. All were buried in shallow graves under the basement floor, covered with lime to control odor and decay. The investigation that followed continued for months as authorities struggled to understand how such an enterprise operated undetected for 2 decades. The answer lay in Constant Sullivan's genius for deception and understanding of human psychology. She created a persona almost perfectly designed to avoid suspicion in a rural 1830s community. The charitable woman caring for orphans appealed to Christian values while explaining household oddities. The story of traumatized children too frightened to interact excused why orphans were never seen publicly. The claim that permanent homes were being arranged explained why children never left. Even more cleverly, Constance created multiple protection layers. Children were taught to call her mother, so if overheard, it seemed a natural family relationship. When glimpsed by outsiders, children were coached to appear shy, not terrified. Substantial food purchases were explained by multiple children. Medical supplies by orphans' poor health. The physical setup was equally well-planned. Basement construction was spread over years with different workers handling different aspects. No single craftsman saw the complete layout or understood its true purpose. Soundproofing was effective. Close neighbors rarely heard anything suspicious. 1834, when they did, sounds could be explained as farm activities or children playing. Perhaps most disturbing was the psychological control system Constant developed. Children were told they'd been abandoned, that no one looked for them, that the outside world was dangerous and hostile. Those who behaved got slightly better food and conditions. Troublemakers were punished as examples. Over time, most accepted captivity as simply their life. The community's reaction to discovery was complete shock and disbelief. Many initially refused to believe Constant Sullivan, the quiet woman among them for 20 years, could be capable of such monstrous acts. Some suggested coercion by her husband or a misunderstanding. These denials became impossible as more evidence emerged. Detailed basement records included correspondence with criminal contacts in other states. Constant Sullivan was part of a network trafficking children across state lines. The Sullivan Farm was one operation in a larger criminal enterprise stretching from Pennsylvania to Georgia. As Sheriff Crawford delved deeper, Disturbing patterns suggested the operation was more sophisticated than initially believed. Correspondence revealed Constant had been in regular contact with at least 12 others across 5 states, all in similar activities. Letters, written in simple code eventually deciphered, discussed merchandise deliveries and quality control, clearly referring to human trafficking. One letter, dated 3 months before discovery, came from someone identified only as Morrison in Philadelphia. Morrison wrote of 6 new items of varying ages and conditions suitable for requirements. It included descriptions of children, approximate ages, physical conditions, and notes on temperament which were compliant, which needed additional training. Financial records painted a more horrifying picture. Constant Sullivan paid between $50 and $200 per child, depending on age and condition. She also received payments from other locations, suggesting the farm served as both destination and distribution point. The total money involved was staggering for the time. Over $8,000 in transactions over 2 decades, equivalent to several $100,000 today. Dr. Marcus Whitfield, the traveling physician, became a key witness. Under questioning, he revealed Constant was unusually specific about requested medications. She had detailed knowledge of treating malnutrition, respiratory infections, and conditions common in severely neglected children. She also asked for sedatives and drugs that could control difficult prisoners. This led to another chilling realization. Constant Sullivan had been systematically studying how to keep large numbers of children alive under extreme deprivation. Medical supplies, her questions, even basement layout, all designed to maximize prisoner survival while minimizing resources. 2228. Local businessman Thomas Henderson provided more pieces. A review of his sales records showed Constant purchased increasing basic supplies over years. What seemed like growing charitable needs was actually evidence of expanding criminal operation. Henderson remembered unusual requests: extra blankets, large quantities of children's clothing, bulk medicine purchases. The investigation also revealed Ezra Sullivan's role. While Constance appeared the mastermind, Ezra handled prison maintenance and child control. Several surviving victims described him as the enforcer carrying out punishments. His basement construction wasn't just expansion, it was constant refinement of a system designed for human captivity. The most disturbing revelation came from analyzing records of children who disappeared from the farm over years. Ledgers showed some transferred to other locations, suggesting a buyer-seller network. Others were marked unsuitable, entries corresponding with remains in the burial chamber. The investigation expanded as authorities in other states examined unsolved disappearances. Missing children reports from Pennsylvania, Maryland, North Carolina, and South Carolina showed disturbing similarities. Many fit the Sullivan farm profile. Poor, orphaned, from families unlikely to search extensively. Federal marshals were called to coordinate the multi-state investigation, unprecedented for the time. The Sullivan case represented one of the first major criminal investigations crossing state lines involving federal authorities. Legal implications were complicated by crimes occurring in different jurisdictions under different laws. As weeks passed, more survivors told their stories. Accounts were remarkably consistent. Years of imprisonment, systematic abuse, psychological manipulation. They described how new arrivals were broken with isolation, punishment, and indoctrination until accepting fate. They spoke of a complex prisoner hierarchy, older children given minor privileges for helping control younger ones. Survivors revealed Constant Sullivan's psychological manipulation extent. She convinced many they were worthless, their families sold or abandoned them, they deserved their treatment. Some older children, imprisoned for years, initially resisted rescue, conditioned to believe the outside world more dangerous. Investigation uncovered evidence of Sullivan's victim acquisition methods. She developed relationships with corrupt poorhouse and orphanage officials providing children for payment. She cultivated contacts among city criminal elements identifying vulnerable children, runaways, street orphans, who wouldn't be missed immediately. Perhaps most chillingly, records showed the operation had been expanding recently. The number of children held increased. Correspondence contained plans for similar facilities elsewhere. The discovery apparently interrupted an enterprise on the verge of becoming much larger. 26:52. The breakthrough exposing the full Sullivan network came unexpectedly. Among surviving children was a girl named Rebecca, approximately 14, held longer than others. Unlike those broken by ordeal, Rebecca maintained defiance and extraordinary memory for details. 27:19, kidnapped from her Pennsylvania farm in 1829 at age 9. She remembered everything. A woman claiming to be a distant relative arriving, luring her with sweets and a town ride, awakening chained in the Sullivan basement. More importantly, she remembered every conversation overheard between Constant and various farm visitors over years. Rebecca's testimony revealed the Sullivan operation was one part of a larger network. She'd heard Constant discuss other farms, other child-holding locations. 28:08. She remembered names, dates, details about child shipments moved between facilities. Her information gave law enforcement their first comprehensive picture of the enterprise scope. The most significant revelation came when Rebecca described a visit 2 weeks before discovery. A well-dressed man arrived in an expensive carriage with 2 others. Rebecca and 3 other children were selected for inspection. The man examined them carefully, checking teeth, muscle tone, health, like livestock evaluation. The visitor ultimately purchased none, complaining they were too damaged for his purposes. But he left a letter with detailed specifications for the type of children he wanted. The letter, found among Constant's papers, described requirements for specific ages, physical characteristics, temperaments. Language was cold and businesslike, discussing humans as commodities. Signed H. Blackwood. It included a Charleston, South Carolina return address. Investigation revealed Henry Blackwood was a wealthy plantation owner purchasing children for years, ostensibly as household servants, but for purposes more sinister. The Blackwood connection opened a new case dimension. Southern plantation owners, it appeared, used the child trafficking network to acquire completely controlled workers. Unlike enslaved people with some legal protections, trafficked children could be worked to death with no consequences. 30:00. They had no searching families, no protective legal status, no escape hope. Investigating the Blackwood connection revealed several other prominent Southern families involved in similar purchases. Children were used not just as laborers but as medical experiment subjects, targets for violent entertainment, for purposes too disturbing for official reports. 30:22. As the criminal network scope became clear, the investigation faced increasing resistance from powerful interests. Several families involved had significant political connections and resources. Threats were made against investigators, witnesses, even surviving children. Sheriff Crawford received anonymous letters warning him to drop the investigation. Deputy Webb was attacked walking home. Dr. Whitfield found his practice boycotted by prominent patients. Pressure aimed to intimidate law enforcement, prevent full network exposure. The situation became more dangerous when Timothy, a surviving boy providing crucial testimony, disappeared from a temporary shelter. A search found nothing. The message was clear. Cooperators faced severe consequences. Despite intimidation, the investigation continued. Federal marshals provided security for key witnesses and investigators. Surviving children were moved to secure locations. Armed guards protected Sullivan farm evidence. The case tested whether the American legal system could function against wealthy, powerful perpetrators. Pressure peaked when Constant Sullivan was found dead in her jail cell. Officially suicide, circumstances were suspicious. Scheduled to testify about the full criminal network, contacts, customers, her death eliminated the most important witness. His testimony provided final puzzle pieces, exposing the full horror for America's most vulnerable children. Samuel Pierce's federal grand jury testimony in Richmond became one of America's most disturbing legal accounts. 34:07. Pierce, a man in his 40s with weathered hands and haunted eyes, worked for Henry Blackwood over a decade. What he saw on the plantation, what he revealed about Sullivan children's fate, shocked seasoned investigators. 34:36. Pierce described the Blackwood plantation operating 2 systems. The main plantation used enslaved labor for cotton. But Blackwood also established experimental quarters, a separate facility holding trafficked children for non-agricultural purposes. Children from the Sullivan Network were medical experiment subjects for Blackwood and Associates, including 2 Charleston Medical College physicians. Experiments tested human endurance limits, studied drug effects, satisfied scientific curiosity of men viewing children as lab animals. Pierce's most damning testimony concerned Blackwood's detailed experiment records. The plantation owner documented everything: children's treatment reactions, survival rates under various conditions, progression of deliberately introduced diseases. Records showed Blackwood and Associates conducted systematic torture disguised as medical research. Testimony revealed at least 37 Sullivan Network children sold to Blackwood over years. Only 4 survived long enough for transfer. The rest died from experiments, malnutrition, or brutal working conditions. Bodies were buried in unmarked graves in a remote plantation section. Pierce also provided information on the broader buyer network. He'd been at meetings where Blackwood discussed purchases with other plantation owners, wealthy businessmen, even politicians. Conversations revealed trafficking extended far beyond investigators' imagination. Children were bought and sold across the country, different buyers having different requirements. But attention overwhelmed someone enduring such trauma. She was eventually placed with a Pennsylvania Quaker family providing quiet, supportive healing environment. Rebecca lived to 73, eventually marrying and raising her own family. But after trial testimony, she never spoke publicly about her experiences again. Legal proceedings revealed full enabling corruption extent. Ezra Sullivan, captured during the initial raid, was convicted on multiple kidnapping, imprisonment, and murder charges. He was hanged in Richmond on November 15, 1836, before 3,000 people. His last words reportedly confessed following the devil's path, pleading forgiveness from tortured children. Henry Blackwood's trial became a sensation, exposing Southern Plantation Society's dark underbelly. Plantation medical records provided systematic torture and murder evidence shocking hardened observers. Blackwood was convicted of multiple murders, sentenced to death. Execution was delayed for years by appeals and political maneuvering. He eventually died in prison in 1841, reportedly of a heart attack, though some suspected poisoning by associates fearing more secrets. The 2 Charleston Medical College physicians were expelled from the profession, sentenced to long prison terms. Their cases led to new medical research and human subject treatment regulations. The medical college itself faced a near-closure scandal as investigators revealed several other faculty knew of illegal experiments but failed to report them. The investigation's most frustrating aspect was powerful individuals escaping justice despite clear involvement evidence. Several wealthy plantation owners fled to Europe pre-arrest. Others used political connections to avoid prosecution or receive minimal sentences. A Georgia state legislator, a major network customer, was censured by his legislature but never faced criminal charges. Financial investigation revealed the trafficking network generated enormous organizer profits. Constant Sullivan alone accumulated over $12,000 in 20-year profits, equivalent to several $100,000 today. Much was never recovered, invested in legitimate businesses or hidden in untraceable accounts. 46:40. The Sullivan farm itself became a symbol of uncovered horrors. Government-seized property was eventually auctioned, but no one wanted to live in such an evil-associated place. The house was demolished in 1845. The basement was filled with concrete and sealed permanently. 47:01. A small cemetery memorialized children who died there, though most names were never known. The case led to significant child welfare and protection reforms. Virginia passed America's first comprehensive child protection laws, establishing orphanage government oversight and background checks for large-scale child caregivers. Other states quickly followed with similar legislation, founding modern child welfare systems. The federal government also responded with new interstate crime and human trafficking laws. The Sullivan case demonstrated state-by-state law enforcement limitations with cross-jurisdictional crimes. New federal statutes gave marshals expanded investigation and prosecution authority, establishing crucial later criminal justice precedents. Perhaps most importantly, the case changed public awareness about child vulnerability and systematic protection need. The romantic charitable individual notion was replaced by realistic understanding of institutional oversight and legal safeguard necessity. Another Sullivan case entered common usage as a vulnerable child abuse situation warning. Dr. Marcus Whitfield, the physician unknowingly enabling the operation through consultations, dedicated his remaining career to child welfare. He established free orphan and abandoned children clinics, advocated medical practice reforms preventing criminal manipulation. His later medical ethics writings were heavily influenced by Sullivan case experience. Sheriff Benjamin Crawford, leading the initial investigation, was promoted to federal marshal, spending his career pursuing similar cases. He became one of the first child crime law enforcement specialists, developing investigative techniques used for decades. 49:40, Crawford's detailed Sullivan case reports became required national law enforcement reading. Over years, children's stories revealed full human resilience scope and systematic abuse's long-term effects. 50:02, some, like Rebecca, built relatively normal lives with proper support. Others struggled with mental illness, addiction, problems stemming from traumatic experiences. A few never recovered, dying young from imprisonment and abuse complications. Network correspondence, preserved as evidence, provided information leading to additional cases for years. Letters contained references to other operations, victims, perpetrators. Some leads brought successful prosecutions. Others led to dead ends or insufficient evidence due to time past. 50:49, one case's most haunting aspects was realizing the Sullivan operation was one part of a larger, decades undetected exploitation system. Investigation revealed similar networks operated elsewhere. Children had been bought and sold like commodities throughout American history. Legal and social systems inadequately protected society's most vulnerable. The case also highlighted community responsibility in preventing such atrocities. Millbrook residents, living 20 years next to one of America's most horrific crime scenes, struggled with guilt and self-examination. How had they missed what happened? What signs were ignored? Could suffering have been prevented with more vigilance or suspicion? These questions led to broader community obligation discussions for most vulnerable members. 52:01, the Sullivan case became a cautionary tale about accepting explanations without investigation, respecting privacy enabling abuse, assuming respectable appearances guaranteed moral behavior. Case legacy extended far beyond immediate inspired legal and social reforms. 52:26, detailed investigation documentation, correspondence, financial records, testimony, became an invaluable American crime and exploitation history resource. Historians, criminologists, social reformers studied it for generations, understanding how systematic evil flourished in apparently normal communities. Ultimately, the Sullivan family's terror reign ended not by sophisticated police work, but by ordinary people's simple courage refusing to ignore trouble signs. William Hutchinson reporting what he heard, Sheriff Crawford taking community concerns seriously, Rebecca's determination to testify despite trauma. 53:17, these individual moral courage acts ultimately exposed one of American history's most horrific criminal enterprises. The basement where 47 children were found chained has been sealed over a century. But their suffering echoes remind us of vigilance, courage, and compassion importance in protecting those who cannot protect themselves. The Sullivan case stands as both human evil testament and individual conscience power reminder to overcome even the most entrenched exploitation and abuse systems. If the story chilled you, you understand why these dark American history chapters must never be forgotten. 54:13, just when we thought we'd seen it all, horror in places like the Sullivan farm intensifies our understanding of how evil hides behind respectable facades. If chilled, share this with a friend who loves dark mysteries, hit like to support our content, and subscribe to never miss stories like this. Let's discover together what other secrets lie buried in America's past. This mystery shows evil often wears respectability's mask, the most horrific crimes committed by those appearing most normal to communities. What do you think? Was everything revealed, or are secrets still buried in Virginia hills? Comment below. If you enjoyed this and want more horror stories like it, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share with a mystery lover. American history's darkness has many more secrets to reveal. We'll be here to uncover them all. See you next video.